Eric, can you kind of cut and paste and
Yep.
like smush things down, because you're really good at that. He's our agenda person. I don't want to pigeonhole him, but I appreciate his skill set. So so Melanie, it's going to take us a minute or so for everyone to get on. And Tiffany, did you have a popcorn question that you wanted to ask? Otherwise, I do have something that might be appropriate.
Yes, I will defer to you because I forgot.
No, that's all right. It's, you know what? There's a lot going on. Hi, Jenny. There's a lot going on, and so so this is an interesting thing. I know how Jenny found out about us, and I've been on a call with her before. She kind of got looped in through the Startup Weekend community. Andrew, how did you happen upon ESHIP?
Well, I attended or followed a link from Norris Kruger, who gave a webinar, and that was in relation to the along with the Kaufman Foundation, and that's how I heard about it. So yes, so and Norris suggested I get involved in entrepreneurial ecosystem builders, and so yeah, it sounded really interesting. So very pleased to be here.
Great. I appreciate that. So as people are getting on, I know Eric had typed in here to drop your name and the organization and where you're calling in from today. So Andrew typed in Liverpool. So every time I see the word Liverpool, I'm sure a lot of people will say they think of the Beatles.
Yes.
We definitely don't want to pigeonhole you into that, but
and orchestral movies in the dark and Little Mix and a few other things.
Nice.
So, and I don't know how expanded this call is going to be. Sometimes we get a dozen people. Sometimes we have a smaller, more intimate group. I do know a lot of people will tune in after the fact because the timing is hard. And right now, talking about inclusion is difficult. You know, there's a lot of difficult conversations out there. So normally when we start these calls, we ask a check-in question. We try to focus the check-in question on who you are, not necessarily what you do, because you are more than your title. So we want to honor that and honor that as a place to be seen and heard. And particularly in this very chaotic and heavy time, want to give you the time and the space to actually express some of the angst those of us, particularly in the United States, are feeling with all that's going on around race right now. And it's not meant to be a therapy session, but to offer you the space to just check in and tell us how you're arriving today with all that's going on in the world. So that's just a very general feeling and consensus. And just a minute, when we do, because everybody appears on your Zoom in very different orientations, we know that it's hard to go around the room. And we also want you to get to know each other. So we will ask you to call on the next person. And so that you get used to calling each other by your first names and building some kind of relationship in that way. So, so it's a very general question about how you're arriving today. So I'm Cecilia, and I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm not usually here very much, but with COVID, I am here more. It's weird not to travel. And I feel heavy, but I also feel hopeful. And the heaviness comes from coming back from a weekend, coming off of a weekend where I was celebrating. It was my birthday, and finding out from people outside of here how there was tear gas and pepper balls being sprayed into a crowd that was 3 blocks from my house. So I came back from dinner, and people who I just had dinner with were asking me if I'm okay, and I'm like, I just left you people, I'm okay. And they said, well, the police officers were dispersing the crowd up the street from my house, and I didn't know. So it's a real interesting time. And Sunday was the 99th anniversary of the largest race massacre in modern history here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So along with all of those things. So that's a lot to take in, but I'm hopeful because all of you are here, and we're working on a community call to try to work and get everyone together to create space to dive into this conversation just a little bit deeper. So bear with us as we try to move all those pieces together, but we hope to get you some information in the next couple of days to let you know when we're scheduling a call, how to sign in, how to get engaged if that's something that would be of value to you. So with that, I'm going to tag Jennifer. Jennifer, how are you arriving today?
Hi. So I'm from Tucson, Arizona, and how am I arriving today? Definitely been getting on a lot of these video conferencing calls a lot more, just like everyone else. And I have to say, like, so I've been so engrossed with like communicating with people digitally that I'm not out there, right? And like to a certain extent, like this last week, I got so busy that I wasn't keeping up with a lot of current events. And so when I heard about the protests, that and it's happening here in Tucson too, like my friends like, yeah, did you hear like some downtown businesses, there were like people, like some businesses were looted, and I'm like, no, why? You know, like, and then I was just like, I have not been tuned in at all. And so when I did get a chance after the weekend to like deep dive into what's going on in the news, it was just so overwhelming, and just like, and like you, Cecilia, I totally understand when you say like heavy, right? Like it just like weighed on me, and I couldn't like, I just like couldn't really like that. I don't know. It's just like these emotions are just like balled in like all at once, and it's frustrating because and I because I'm like okay with talking to people about it, absolutely, but there are certain people who talk and I'm just like why are you saying what you're saying, right? Like, oh, it's happened before. And I was like, yeah, but the sad thing is it's still happening. And the fact that we're still haven't resolved this issue, like that it's continuing, like, and it's getting worse and worse because it's like they're not being like heard. So we had a vigil the other night, and it's just kind of like a very difficult situation because like COVID's still going on too. And so you have like these protests and you want to do something about it. And then there's like this pandemic that's going on at the same time. And it kind of makes me feel a little helpless. Because then I have to like decide like what to do. Like, because I'm still living with my parents and it's like they're of course older and stuff like that. But it's like I want to support, you know, my friends and in the community. So yeah. I'm at this point where I'm just a little, you know, stuck in a way. But yeah, here I am. Here I am. I'm gonna popcorn it over to Melanie.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm Melanie Thornton, and I'm just outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. And I'm here at Tiffany's invitation to talk about inclusive webinars in terms of access for people with disabilities in a little bit. But I appreciate the question, because what I realize is that I go through my days with kind of back and forth between feeling what I feel and then being on and pushing all of what's happening in the world aside a bit to do what I'm supposed to do in that moment. And so I feel a lot of up and down, and it's nice to join a conversation where there's some authenticity, and it's okay to do what I'm here to do, but also kind of be honest that this is a very emotional time. So thank you for the invitation to be here. And I'm going to pop it over. Oh, there was somebody that was on a non-video participant, but now he's here. So I believe that's Eric.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, it's, and I'll mention in the popcorn thing, one of the things is we're sort of building that connectivity between folks. So even if you don't know some people, sometimes, especially if you don't know someone, it's good to kind of popcorn it over to them, and you get what you get. How are we arriving today? You know, in a lot of ways, it's sort of all over the place. I'm sort of just coming off of what felt like a really good meeting with some folks in Long Beach, city of Long Beach, and addressing some of the issues going on right now about, you know, equity and different communities, people of color. So I guess I'm thankful right now that there are places where we're seeing progress and authentic conversations about really redressing some of the needs that are out there. I think, is that all we've got on the call? I'm just seeing the videos right now. Do we have other folks that I'm missing? We heard from Andrew. Oh, we haven't heard from Richard. Richard, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. I joined a bit late. What is the popcorn question?
It's basically, how are you arriving today? We just wanted to, and thank you, Melanie, for cutting into your presentation time to just give us this space in this very uncertain time to kind of express. So, Richard, how are you arriving today?
Via my phone on 4.5 bars out of 5 of LTE. But in all seriousness, I am always the forever optimist in everything I do. And I was really worked up earlier today about the situation in Troy, New York, with a planned and an unplanned protest looming over our heads with the possibility of a riot. I just got back from my grandfather's funeral today in New York City. I have to drive back up to Troy to move my stuff out of my current apartment, because it is right next to the police station where I'm sure, and everyone is sure, the epicenter of the unrest will be, to my friend's place, not in like downtown Troy. So I have to go and do that in a bit. But I am forever the person that says, let's find the silver linings and let's find the good things in all the bad things that happen, and learn and grow and find ways to use this, whatever it is, terrible thing, to be better and to build things that will outlast. And we will be fine. We will come back, not to normal, but to better than ever. And that mindset has really helped me through all of this. So I'm good. I'm happy. I'm well, alive, and healthy. My family's doing well, and all in all, doing great.
Okay, so there's Andrew, Tiffany, and Lashana.
Let's go with Lashana.
Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, no, that's correct. I'm gonna try to make it easy for everyone because I'm coming from a few crossroads. For those who haven't followed the news, on June 1st, there was unrest here in the downtown area of the city of St. Louis. But I spent most of the weekend trying to split my mind between being excited about the first crewed launch from the United States in almost a decade. I am a big NASA fanatic. I tell people, if you want to make me happy, give me anything with a NASA logo on it. And I even went to adult space camp, so I'm that kind of nerd. I know Richard is loving that. So half of me is arriving with the elation of the successful launch, but at the same time, being a woman of color here in downtown St. Louis when the unrest happened, and unfortunately we don't have any elected officials that live in downtown. So as chair of the neighborhood association, I'm the closest you're going to get. And I spent a lot of Monday night, early Tuesday morning messaging with members of our community to try to keep everyone safe, in that there were buildings burning, but we wanted to make sure that none of them were residential buildings. And at the same time, having lived in downtown during Ferguson as well, I have a lot of things on my mind. But the easy part for you is that I actually wrote about some of that in a Medium blog, so I will share that. My feelings are torn, but I am taking a breath. I ended up taking a day for myself just to get my mind together and continuing moving forward, helping with the St. Louis Equity and Entrepreneurship Collective, with Downtown Neighborhood Association. And I just recently became a board member of the International Institute of St. Louis, which focuses very heavily on helping immigrants with anything. It could be financial, it could be resource related, and trying to put all of that pain and anger and frustration and love into those entities to actually progress things forward. So a little bit of half and half. So my pain is a little new, like many of you. So just hoping that I can keep forward. And I am going to popcorn over. Who hasn't gone yet?
Tiffany and Andrew.
Tiffany, I'll popcorn over to you.
Thanks, Lashana. Today I'm coming from a good place. Yesterday I was feeling hopeless and overwhelmed and confused and unsure of just what was happening in the nation and our community. George Floyd's murder, Breonna Taylor's murder, is disgusting and an atrocity, and I feel like the news cycle is moving away from talking about them as people, and it's talking more about like property destruction, and that, I find that to be gross and distracting. But waking up this morning, it sounds like there was the pendulum sort of swung back the other way towards more peaceful demonstrations, which brought me back up a little bit, just like, maybe the message is becoming more clear. I think there's some self-patrolling going on, which is excellent. We had some people march to the governor's mansion last night here in Arkansas. And so watching it on Facebook Live, that was just really encouraging to me to kind of hear how people are talking to each other, like within the crowd of people. That was really encouraging. And then this morning I had someone called me, and I think I was just like on their leads list for something. They were just like a business person. And talking with them, he mentioned that he has a white dad and a Filipino mom. And I was just curious. And so I asked him, like, what is that like for you? What was that like for you? To be born and raised here in Arkansas. He was raised in like a super teeny tiny town. And just this leadless call like turned into an hour conversation. He told me about his sister and his grandmother, and different states that he moved in. And that brought a lot of hope too, because I would have never asked someone just about their life experience in a conversation like that. And so I also feel hope, like maybe other people are having conversations just about other people's life experiences and making deeper connections. And so today it's good. And Andrew, I'll send it over to you.
Thank you very much, Tiffany, and good evening to all. Sorry, I know it's late in the day here. It's a good day to you all, and very pleased to be here. Like all of you, I'm feeling very mixed emotions at the moment. I think it's probably I'm certainly feeling pain from what's happening in America and the United States. I've travelled a lot around the States, and so I kind of feel for what's happening in the cities, which I remember very fondly, and feel that. We feel it in Liverpool, actually, very strong connections with the United States. There's also a prevailing sense of grief here in the UK generally. We've been hit very badly here in Liverpool by COVID. And for various reasons, and some of them relate to exclusion or discrimination, systemic discrimination. COVID is very close related to poverty, as it's now becoming clear. It's also very close related to both race and gender discrimination as well. I think I'm right in saying 3 times the number of people in ethnic communities have died here in the UK, often more women, and that's to do with roles people play and their access to healthcare and so on. So I feel grief as well. That's what's going on around the world, and there's also a sense of responsibility because we've got to make this better. And I think we have a role. A friend of mine sort of lifted my spirits somewhat when she said, because I was describing feeling helplessness in relation to all of this. How do what can we do? Again, we're going through the same things again and again. We've seen this for our lives. And she said, well, our contributions to this is going to be on as we come out of this, as we go forward, we have to make a contribution, and hopefully that's what I can do along with others. And that's why I was keen to join a community of people who can perhaps kind of lift our gaze and just think about what can we do with our communities going forward to make them more inclusive and fairer and more open, and just enable people to build a better world, because we have to do it. So thank you for involving me tonight. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
So Faye, you joined us. We wanted to give you time and space to share how you're arriving today. I know we're indulging a little bit on Melanie's presentation time, but in light of all the things that are going on, we want to create an island of sanity, as Margaret Wheatley says, just an island of sanity to be able to share. So Faye, would you like to share how you're arriving today?
Yes, hello, thank you. I'm glad to be here with all of you. I very rarely get to make this call, so I'm glad to have a moment. I won't take long because I know you have a presentation, but I'm coming very, I would say, heavy and hopeful. There is a lot weighing on all of us right now, and as a nation, and as individuals, and as ecosystems. And That said, I have this sense and this feeling that if we can look forward and past it, we can stay focused on the design of new systems and new opportunities that can fill the void for the old broken ones, and that is a space where I want to live. So yeah, I'm looking forward.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so Faye works, she's the president of Forward Studies for people who don't know, and works towards creating equitable entrepreneurial ecosystems alongside of people like Eric. So really great to have her join finally. She's one of my islands of sanity. So that's why I think we're also hive mind, because when she said heavy and hopeful and I said heavy and hopeful, you'll know why. Tiffany, would you please introduce our guest so that we can share in her presentation? Do you need to share slides or anything, Melanie?
Sure, I have slides
Okay.
I could share.
Okay, great. I will enable that. Tiffany?
Yes, I am very excited and pleased to introduce our guest speaker today, Melanie Thornton. She is the coordinator of Access and Equity Outreach for Partners of Inclusive Communities at the University of Arkansas. Melanie did a great presentation for the conductor of my organization a couple weeks ago, talking about this very topic, accessible webinars, and how can we as ecosystem builders, as we're designing all of this online content, whether it's creating new content or shifting our current work to a digital platform, how can we be sure to have it be in a way that everyone, regardless of ability, can access it? And so I'm just thrilled for her to come and share her wisdom and knowledge with us on this very timely subject. And so with that, Melanie, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Tiffany, for inviting me, and thanks to all of you for having me here today and to be able to join in what feels like a really nice community. So I appreciate that. What I've done before has been a little bit more of a formal presentation than what I plan to do today. I want to make sure there's plenty of space for questions or discussion and make sure it's on target for what you need. But I did prepare or kind of pared down slides I've used before. So I'll use those as kind of a jumping off place, but feel free to ask questions at any time. Make sure that it's on target for you. So I want to, because of the space that you've already created, I want to say that I'm someone who identifies as non-disabled, which I think is an important thing to share. I work at the intersection of access and disability as a non-disabled person. And so I typically talk about design and access and what we as non-disabled people can do to create more accessible environments. I don't talk about disability per se, and I encourage you to, if you want to have a longer conversation about including the disability community, to invite a disability activist into your meetings to talk about that topic. So today we're going to talk about, like, when you're online, how can you make sure that environment that you create is as accessible as possible. And I'm going to start by saying that what I would normally do is to send a handout ahead of time, and I didn't do that, but normally you would have a PDF that's fully accessible, so that if what is shown on the screen is not accessible to you, either because of a vision loss or because of a learning disability, or because you're dialing in instead of looking at the computer, you have access to something that shows you where we are in the conversation. And that's really a part of digital accessibility, which we're going to be focusing on, since this is a digital environment. And digital access just involves creating websites and mobile apps and documents in such a way that they can be accessed and understood by a wide range of users. It's about kind of imagining all of the people that might be using that product and designing with that in mind. The symbol on this slide is a figure with a human figure with hands and legs outstretched, and that's come to be the symbol for digital access. Some of you, if you're a Mac user, you've probably seen something similar on your Mac. When we talk about the online environment in terms of something like Zoom or a webinar setting, then there are three kind of main things we need to think about in terms of making sure it's accessible. One, we want to make sure that things are perceivable, understandable, and navigable. So in terms of perceivable, we want to make sure that anything we share visually is accessible to someone that doesn't see it. Anything that's provided audibly is accessible to someone who doesn't hear it. And then making sure that things are as intuitive and clear as possible, avoiding a lot of acronyms and things that might cause someone to feel that they're missing, kind of out of the loop, so to speak. And then finally, making sure that those who use assistive technology can access the content and navigate the platform. You're using Zoom, which is, when we talk, well, let me back up a little bit. When we talk about assistive technology, usually, well, we're talking about two different ways that people access things different than what most people kind of, their mind goes to in terms of accessing a computer. One is people who are blind who use screen reader users who navigate the computer with a software application like one that's popular is JAWS, another is NVDA, and another is VoiceOver on a Mac. And so that gives the person all kinds of information about what is happening on the computer and the navigation. The other way that people navigate that is sometimes excluded is through the use of the keyboard instead of the mouse, or other devices like a device that pushes the keys on the keyboard, or voice activation that navigates. And when things are not designed with those kinds of technologies in mind, those folks are excluded. Zoom has been probably the most proactive in terms of creating a product that's easily navigated by folks that are using the keyboard only or using a screen reader. There are a few others that do a pretty good job of accessibility, but since you're already using Zoom, you're in pretty good shape there. So some of the barriers that I've already started kind of alluding to are inaccessible platforms. Like sometimes people just want to use whatever free, cool tool they discover, and often those are not accessible. Presenters, when they rely on or assume that everyone is seeing what's on the screen, small text, and that gets to be a problem for all of us more and more every year, I think. Inaccessible handouts, and we'll talk a little bit about what it means to have an accessible handout in a bit. And then lack of captions, or a lot of people are thinking that they can rely on auto captions. If you have a Zoom account that is higher level than the Pro account, it creates auto captions, and so a lot of people they record their presentation and then they pop it up there with these automatically created captions, which are often not accurate and don't have good punctuation and capitalization where they should, making it really hard for deaf folks to follow. So on the screen, I want to just mention the technology that's here. It's called a Braille output device, and this is what someone would use in combination with a screen reader like JAWS, where they read a line of text and then refresh, and then another line of text appears on the Braille output device. So there's some great technology, but unless we design things well, the technology can't really overcome poor design. So some of the things to consider in terms of creating accessible meetings or training, online training, are making sure that the announcement is provided in accessible ways. So if you send an email out, you want to make sure that the text is there, not just send an image. I see a lot of advertisements that say, see attached, and there's a brochure or a flyer attached, but it's purely an image. So there's no text there that would be accessible to someone who is blind or someone who has dyslexia that uses software to read what's there. And also make sure that people know that you're providing access. So a lot of times people assume that something's not going to be accessible to them unless you say up front things like what platform you're using, information about the accessibility and how handouts will be provided, and then also provide a way for people to request accommodations like captioning or an ASL interpreter, or to make sure for them to say, I really need large print handouts, or I need a digital version of the handout. And then if we're going to say we're going to provide accommodations, we have to be ready to really provide those accommodations. And there are lots of vendors for remote captioning services and remote ASL interpreting services where the captionist just logs in like another user, but then you promote them to captionist and they can caption the content. Or an ASL interpreter would be someone who's in one of the windows that we're seeing other participants in here, and they're signing for the participants. So there's some real specific things that you might have to do if that were going to happen, but usually the captionists and the ASL interpreters can walk you through what you would need to do on your end. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on those, the nitty-gritty of that. So as I mentioned, it's important to have materials be accessible. So as I said, I would normally have saved this PowerPoint as a PDF and shared it in advance, or put it on a website that could be downloaded. That's what I typically do. I may email it, but I also put it somewhere and mention the URL where it could be downloaded. And you actually can download this at exploreaccess.org/handouts. They're actually all of the handouts for all the presentations I've done recently. So feel free to go and just get happy downloading if you want to. But in addition to the making sure you provide the handout digitally, you want to make sure that you design it in a way that's accessible. And so that would be true of both PowerPoint and Word documents, making sure that someone could easily access that using a screen reader or other assistive technology. On this slide, I wanted just to refer you to that website, exploreaccess.org, because there are a lot of tutorials on how to create your handouts in ways that are accessible. So let's talk just briefly about PowerPoint, since that's usually what people use when they provide an online presentation. And some of the basic tips for making it accessible, and of course, I do a whole session on this, so we could go into a lot more detail, but one of the things is to just make sure that you have good contrast on your slide. I like a light gray background with black text, but you could go the opposite and have a darker background with light text, as long as that contrast is really good. And sadly, a lot of the PowerPoint templates don't provide good access. So you want to make sure you choose one that does. As a rule, I typically say that the font size should be 24 points or larger for an online presentation, and a bit larger in person, maybe 28 point. So, that's really, a lot of times people try to put so much text on one slide that it makes it hard to read, and that actually makes it better. We kind of, often we use our slides for our own prompts, and we don't really need all of that text. And what happens typically is, if you have a lot of text, people are trying to read that and they can't listen to us present and read it at the same time. So I think in general, it's a good design to have smaller amounts of text. You want to also choose layouts that match the content, not start with a blank slide and just add text boxes, because when you save that, those text boxes may not be accessible in your PDF. Adding alt text to images. Alt text may be a new phrase for you, I'm not sure, but it just means an alternative text description of the image. And it's real easy to do when you're creating a PowerPoint. You would, like on my slide where I have the PowerPoint logo, I would just right click on that. And when I do, in newer versions of PowerPoint, I'll see an option that says edit alt text. I click on that, a box will show up, and I just type a description of what someone who doesn't see that image is missing. So in that case, I might say PowerPoint logo. I might provide a little bit more detail, but you want those to be really short. I used to say they should be about the length of a tweet, but I understand recently that the length of a tweet has increased, so maybe half the length of a tweet would be a good guideline for that. And then once you've created your PowerPoint in a way that's accessible, you want to make sure you save it to PDF instead of printing to PDF. When you save it to PDF, it will retain all of those accessibility features that you put in. If you choose print to PDF, it strips them right out, and a screen reader user will, when they get to your PowerPoint or your PDF, they just hear blank. So it needs to keep all of those elements in for it to be accessible. Were there any questions? I see some chats, but I don't have the chat up, so those.
I have a question, Melanie, about the closed captioning, because I know that the closed caption, if I click on that as a host, it says assign someone to type, obviously, or I will type. But then in the using the third-party closed captioning services, it has a thing that says copy the API token. And if I paste it into, so I would have to engage with some closed captioning tool, like the tools that you mentioned, and then copy whatever the token is into that platform. So, and then letting people know that that's the platform that we're engaging. Is that correct?
Well, you're actually asking questions that I've not used before, or methods of captioning, because what I typically do is we contract with a captioner. They join the session, and then when they show up, I click on something that says, when I'm using the webinar feature, I have them join as a panelist, and then I just click on assign as captioner. So how the token works, I'm sorry, I'll have to research that. I'm not, but you have to have like to really have accurate captions, you have to have a live person that you've hired in order to provide that. So
okay, thank you.
I'll research that and get back with you, because I should.
That would be great, because that's the box that pops up when you click on closed caption.
Okay.
Melanie, I have a question. I don't know if I'm next, but I wanted to ask you about the length of material and whether, in your view, sort of breaking things down into bite-sized chunks actually has an accessibility aspect. It makes it a bit more complex, perhaps, in some areas, so maybe a bit of trade-off. But and also mobile access, because heavy files often are hard to download on certain mobiles, and there's a kind of certain form of social exclusion there around whether you've got the necessary hardware. So interesting to get your thoughts on that.
Okay, let me get a little bit of clarification. Let me go with the second question first in terms of downloads, heavy downloads and social exclusion. I think definitely, are you concerned that like the size of the PowerPoint may be?
Yeah, that's one part of it.
Yes.
Yeah, or even the platform, even joining the platform, for example, might be difficult on certain devices or in low bandwidth areas, for example.
That's a very good point. And so I think that's also an advantage to making sure that people have the option to join in whatever way that works for them. So if you're providing it on Zoom and you give people the option to call in or or use a computer to join, that doesn't solve the access problem for everyone, but it does reduce the number of people who are potentially left out. And then if you get into the habit of thinking about talking through your slides, providing the information that's missing there, then you're making it accessible to both folks who don't see it because they are blind, but also folks who join by phone and because they don't have the bandwidth to join on a computer, or they don't have the computer. So that's a really good point. And I want to say specifically right now, not long ago, when everyone moved online on college campuses, well, everywhere, but I'm most connected with people on college campuses, deaf people were hugely left out because they went from being on campus, having an interpreter in the classroom, to trying to access from home, some of whom, I heard stories of people like driving around with their phone looking for Wi-Fi connection so they could see the interpreter on the screen and try to see the slides and the interpreter on a little bitty screen. So keeping all of that in mind is critical in making sure there are options. One of the, some things that deaf or anyone might not think about, like for a deaf person, if they have the phone number and can dial into Zoom, they could choose to use video relay interpreting, which is available anytime you make a phone call. So there are other options, but sometimes if things are not set up that way, if the phone number is not given out, then a deaf person wouldn't even realize they could have that option.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm still missing part of your question. So can you help me?
Sorry, it was a double-ended question. Well, the first one was about the size of the files, and then the other part of the question was about mobile access, and which I think you've answered. So it was the first part was really about creating quite heavy files in the first place, which are quite hard to download and also require quite a long time to present. So it's also a question of, there are some individuals find sitting for long periods difficult, for example, and so that was also part of the question. So not just a bandwidth question, but also sitting in front of the screen can sometimes, and that might include parents with children, for example, or people in home situations where getting 45 minutes of quiet time could be quite difficult. So I just wonder what your thoughts were on that in terms of how to be more inclusive from that perspective.
Yes, well, definitely. And it's a good reminder that you asked that question, because sometimes I create a PowerPoint, a PDF from a PowerPoint, and forget to optimize it for size. And so that's an important consideration and I think that's also a good reason to at least have it for download on a website versus sending it by email, because a lot of people don't have access to email that allows for large sizes. So all of that is important. And another thing that could be kind of a a step above in terms of minimizing the file size is that if your slide presentation is mostly bulleted lists and the text is the main thing that's important, you can actually, and I'll just go ahead and do that here. Oops. So you can, if you've designed your slides in an accessible way, then you can go toggle between those thumbnails that you were seeing to this outline view, and you could just copy and paste all of this text into a Word document or a text document and have that for folks to follow along with or take notes from. And that would be another way to kind of reduce that need for a higher bandwidth.
Yeah.
But if your slides are not designed accessibly, if I had started with a blank slide and added a text box, this content wouldn't be here. So I couldn't grab it and take it. So designing with accessibility in mind really helps a lot of folks.
Thank you.
Okay. Did that get to your question?
Yes, it did. Thank
Okay.
you. It was some good points. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
I agree about the design point. That's really the kind of key, isn't it? Creating lots of options.
Yes. Yes.
Around how the material can be accessed. Yeah.
Yes. And then too, if you're presenting, I think, and I guess we'll get to that here in a minute. Oh, here it is. So I kind of mentioned that already, having options for connecting computer, phone, but also recording the session so that in the situation you mentioned where someone is parenting or even trying to homeschool their children and do work, telework at the same time, something disrupts that and they can go back and access that recording later. And I see you're recording this call for folks that have missed out. And I sent a message to Tiffany earlier that I might get popped off because it was there was a storm here. So you just never know when things can disrupt. So having that session recorded is a good plan. And I want to honor our time here. I've gone a little longer than I expected. How are we doing?
We have a hard stop at 3, so we've got, if you have 5 more minutes, that'll give us a couple minutes for questions.
Okay, perfect. So some of this I've already covered. So during your presentation, you want to provide some different options for questions, maybe chat. Some parts, like some places have a Q&A place where you can put questions, giving people your email address in case they're not comfortable with any of those. And then if your group is small and manageable enough, allowing people to ask their questions if typing a question presents a barrier for someone is a good plan. Providing visual information like when you're moving to the next slide, again, not assuming everyone can see this slide content as I've mentioned, and providing all of the missing information for someone that's not seeing the content. Another good tip is to, if you have more than one presenter, just say when, announce your name when you're changing presenters so that people can follow who the presenter is. And I think that's good for all of us. Having someone else monitor the chat for you is good, and making sure that those questions in the chat are read aloud rather than assuming that people are reading those questions. And then finally, using a headset or something to reduce the background noise, because for some of us background noise is annoying, for others it can be exclusive. And that's it. I couldn't remember how many slides I had left. So any other questions?
That was great, thank you. open it up for questions.
Can I ask one more? I know I've been greedy with questions, but hello?
We hear you.
Oh, right, sorry. I think I lost the screen here. I was just asking about, do you think it's a good idea, Melanie, to get material, both slightly written content with a voiceover out in advance, and focus the webinar around discussion or some activity or breakout rooms, that kind of thing? So we're generally sort of shifting content beforehand and also making it available afterwards.
Certainly. I mean, I think if you design that way, that works better for a lot of people. And in general, I think if someone can listen to something passively, and then you use the time together to really be together, if that's doable, you know, you have a small enough group where you can really do that, then I think that makes sense. I do think that again, we kind of make a lot of assumptions about what is going to work for folks. So if you, like, for most people, having a conversation in Zoom would work really well. But if you do have someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, you're going to want to think about access and think about the delays that that person might experience, so that you really give them time to jump in. If they're using an interpreter, you may even, you know, kind of pause a little longer than normally, so that they get that this is time for them to respond and they have the chance to say that. Otherwise, things kind of tend to run along too fast for some folks to keep up with.
Yeah. Okay.
Good question.
I have what I think I hope is a pretty quick question. Is there a place you recommend? I sometimes like to use a checklist just to kind of go through, say, a presentation or some kind of an event to make sure that it's being as accessible as possible. Is there any kind of checklist that you recommend or place you can point this to?
Yes, absolutely.
If those exist.
Yes, if you go to the exploreaccess.org/handouts and download, skip the first handout and go to the second one that is about accessible webinars in the list. In that handout, it's a little bit more expanded than this one. And at the end, it has a list of resources. Actually, that may still be in my handout, but anyway, we can move on from that. It has a list of resources that go into more detail about kind of the steps that you need to think about. Mm-hmm.
Great, that's wonderful. We put a link into the Access website. So thank you so much for all of this. Thank you for all the information and expanding our thought process to things that we may not be as aware of. So Tiffany, do you have something else you'd like to wrap us up with?
Sure. Melanie, how can we get a hold of you if we think of questions later?
Sure. You can email me at as in Melanie, and then it's the first 6 letters of my last name. It's THORNT@uark.edu.
So if we can, we'll put that also into the notes, if that's okay, Tiffany. You can add that. That would be great. Thank you again for your time. Just to wrap everybody up, for those of you who may not have gotten the email or are curious, we are hosting the ESHIP Summit this year. It will take place virtually, September 15th and 16th. And we're still in the summit design. Just to give you a heads up that there is an opportunity to submit for presentations. So that call for presentations should be going out in the next little while. So just keep abreast of that. We will keep hosting these calls, and thank you for making space and allowing people to share openly today. I think that's really important, and we're working towards that as well. So we're definitely in the works of hosting a community call to address some of the racial issues that are going on, obviously systemic and historical, and hoping to be able to provide some tangible, actionable things, or just open up space as a community to support you as we navigate this thing for a long time. And the realization, and one of the things that somebody said on a call recently, I'm going to try to pull that up so that I don't misquote, is that so between COVID and all of the racial tensions and things, we're basically weathering the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. So so recognizing that people are coming at this work differently, and have different perspectives and lived experiences. So we want to raise up the opportunity to honor those things. So thank you again for your time and energy and sharing this with us. We'll give you back the rest of your day, and this call will go on to the dashboard, and we'll look forward to meeting all of you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Right.
you.
Well.
Bye.